Hey everyone, welcome to the latest episode of our alphabetical taboo busting journey. Today is N for negativity. Now, we want to dive into this from a couple of different angles, one of which is negativity always in the eye of the beholder? Is there an empirical version of positivity versus negativity? And really, what causes it? Is it something in our upbringing or environment? Do we have some internal disposition towards one or the other? And how can we change that disposition throughout our lives if we want to? So, Sylvia, it's a really positive thing that you're on the show today.
I was just about to say, I'm very positive about seeing you and talking with you as always.
Absolutely. No, it's a really interesting topic to me because I know we've both talked about having had instances in the past where we've been told we were negative when we both felt in the moment we were being realists. And while I'll fully admit that sounds like a complete bullshit excuse for something, because like when I see someone say, I'm a realist, I just do tough love. It's so easy to be nice. I'm hardcore. If you can't deal with my I turn off. I immediately assume that person's an asshole,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, there are instances where genuinely being called out for negativity is such a it really diminishes the value that you're trying to bring into a conversation. And I'd really love to start with a story that kind of actually riffs off one of yours, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Which is where I had a leader in a sales organization and we were doing a review of our pipeline, and we were literally at the point where if everything came in, we would hit our number. And I said to him, what's our backup? I had just stepped into this role. I'd moved between countries and I sat down and I said, what's our backup? If these deals don't come in, what other deals are we working on? And I was shocked to find out that there were none. And I said, what do we do if they don't come in? And his answer was, they just have to come in. We have to make this work. And I'm there pointing out that that's not a way to run a sales organization. I'm saying, look, we need to go out prospecting. We need to fill our funnel. We need to make sure that if these don't come in, that we don't just come up empty handed. And I'm told I'm negative, that I'm being pessimistic. We'll deal with that when we come to it. And I'm like, when we come to it is quarter end. That's like saying we'll cross that bridge after we burn it. That's not how anything works. But I was told I was negative. I'll admit I then took that up with others and I said, look, I've run the numbers. We're in deep shit if we don't change something. Luckily there was some action taken, but at the end of the day, it's to your point earlier before we started recording, it's a wish at best and a delusion at worst. And labeling any kind of criticism as negativity is a really great way to burn a bridge while you're still standing on it.
I chuckled a moment ago when you were just beginning the story beginning to tell it, and I chuckled because I had an insight. I just realized why, in a similar scenario, I was called negative. So again, your story reflects the one that I have similarly in that, right? I had a leader who had these delusional goals. Now, the goals themselves weren't the problem. It was the lack of planning, the lack of substantive process, right? Like it was just like, oh, we just have to get there, or we just will get there. And I'm like, no. And I just realized a moment ago as you were telling the story that when I said, actually, we need plan B, or we need to really delve into the specifics of step by step how we're going to get there, I realized he called me negative because my criticism or my doubts in his head were about him. So in this case, right, what he was saying was, oh, we're going to have X thousand of people on this thing and it's going to be great, right? What he was saying was, I am enough to draw that kind of crowd, right? I have that kind of followership. I have that kind of celebrity status. How dare you say that I don't, right? So then what he was actually saying was that it wasn't that I was negative per se, but that was the only available language. It was that, well, Sylvia, like, how can you doubt me, right? you're such a bitch for doubting me. Like, how could you even say that out loud in front of other people? Like, you don't think I can draw a crowd of 3,000? I'm like, I don't give a shit whether you think you can or not. Because guess what? If you don't, it affects me and the people behind me. So I'm going to do everything I can to ensure that we land that damn plane. Like, right? But yet I just realized that negativity, it was in the eye of the beholder, because what he heard was something entirely different. It was about his status. It was about his whatever, right? Lights or whatever you want to call it, the shininess. And so I wonder if in your case, you know, your leader had something similar where he based his or he based something, right, on the result on him, or I'm not quite saying it right, but it's like this idea that like maybe inherent to his status as a leader, it would mean that, well, like I just have that magical prowess. It is or it isn't.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in your example, it clearly played into some lingering insecurities of not being good enough. And I remember a conversation that you and I actually had probably about a year ago, when you asked me how it was when I was writing for someone or producing video for someone and got feedback on it, whether I felt like I took it personally.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember back then I said, actually, if it's in a sort of work-related scenario where I've been contracted to create something for someone else, my mindset is currently at a place where I can go, right, it's not that they're criticizing my ability to deliver, it's the current state of what I'm delivering, which isn't to their specifications.
Right.
And it took me a long time to get there. I'll just completely admit there was a long time where that would have hurt like hell.
Yeah.
And with some aspects of my creativity, honestly, I'm still there
Yeah.
where I'd really struggle and like I'd eventually get to that point, but I'd have to feel a bit of pain first. And I wonder, maybe just a lot of people haven't gone through those steps because, especially, you know, from my perspective, I only know this from the creative side of things. You kind of have to build a tough shell and you learn to deal with criticism over time. But in the corporate world, I haven't seen as active a focus, I guess, on helping people figure out what that criticism means. Because when criticism is delivered in a good way, in a constructive way, it is about caring about making you better and helping you become a better version of yourself. But even when it is delivered in a good way, there are people that don't receive it in a good way. And I wonder, because we talked about this disposition towards negativity, I wonder if there's a complete, I guess, whether the Venn diagram of this and people who constantly veer towards bringing up negative aspects in conversations themselves, whether that Venn diagram is effectively a circle. Because if you think about the people that when you bring something up, they will always jump to the negative conclusions. You know, you're telling them about a holiday that you took to, I don't know, let's say to Thailand, and they immediately go, oh, I can't deal with that heat and the mosquitoes and the insects on, you know, the food is too spicy for me. People that dive into a diatribe of all the things that could be wrong about the good thing that you're doing. I wonder if those are the same people that take on criticism in that negative light, or if they're still separated.
I like to think of it this way. So each of us is kind of like a fruit, right? And when pressed, we squeeze out juice, right? The juice is squeezed out, right? So if the fruit is sour, right? Like, or let's say, right, the predominant flavor in that fruit is sourness, that juice is going to be sour, right? And I think in a lot of cases, and myself included, right, I was taught a lack mindset growing up. It was always about the negative spin on things. It was not about the positive, or right. It was always half empty, not half full. And so I thought about that recently because, and I think a lot just in what I do about conversations, interactions, how do you engage with people? How do you show up to affect the outcomes that you want, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things I realized is at the end of the day, when we interact with people, it is just a filtering of what's inside. So if the predominant, let's say called juice or a narrative or tapes or whatever you want to call that piece, if the predominant stance of that substance inside is negative, what gets squeezed out is going to be negative. It might be less negative. So for instance, right, I say this to Luke all the time. I'm very prickly about criticism around what I do at home. But that's because I'm a perfectionist in my own home, right? So the tape has been going probably for days, weeks, months about how I ought to probably get this thing behind me more organized. I, need to get my kitchen more organized because I cook a lot. So the tape has been going, yet I'm just tired, I'm lazy, I got other things to do. So when someone goes, Sylvia, you might want to reorganize your spice rack. It's kind of not like very user friendly. Like, I don't know what's in here. It's going all over the place. I'm like, I know. Because it's in my head. Now that's a small thing, right? It's harmless. Yet what does that go back to, right? That comment is harmless, but it goes back to me judging myself first, right? That I'm unorganized, that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, right? That I'm this terrible, messy person. I'm not perfect, right? And I have all these flaws and I could be better organized and, all these other narratives. So yet, right, like I think about, right, that moment of intersection with someone's comments and suggestion, and then me coming into that with that predominantly and really consistently negative voice, that's where the powder keg kind of happens, right? And that's already filtered. That's the sad thing. I'm like, what came out was already filtered. And that's the scary part.
But it's funny because I think so many explosive interactions, if not almost all of them, are exactly that. It's an internal conversation that we've had that's just built to a boiling point until someone else's probably innocent comment just pushes it over the line. And there's there's a great sketch on Key and Peele about it where you're seeing them text each other, and one person continuously misreads the other person's text as really passive aggressive, but the other one just thinks they're having a nice conversation. And eventually they're like, oh, should we meet up? And the guy's like, oh, I'm gonna meet you. Yeah, I'm good. And he shows up with like a baseball bat or something. And the other guy's like, hey, what's up? And they realize that they've basically like been miscommunicating this whole time. And it's a funny sketch, but in reality, it's such a good illustration of how we will wind ourselves up into that sort of negative mindset. And one of the best places to see this happen in real time is social media. You'll see someone post something that doesn't have to be political, it doesn't have to be divisive, but someone will come in and go on a rant about something that's seemingly not even connected, but they somehow make it about whatever's been bothering them. And that to me it's a form of negativity, because it means that you're, to use your fruit example, and by the way, as a side point, I've been called fruity my entire life, but that might be the first time I've been called juicy as well. But they've been taking in so much negativity and letting it out that they start filtering every single thing in their environment as a negative thing. They see it as an attack on them, or they see it as somehow an assault on their privilege, or however you want to see it. And that must be an incredibly tiring way to live your life, because if I give an example from a conversation I had not too long ago with a friend, where I got, I will say, disproportionately frustrated by a comment a friend of mine made. And I didn't lash out so much as I'll admit I kind of replied in some snarky or semi like sarcastic manner, because I was just like, I was tired of it, and I just kind of replied. And then I started wondering, why did this frustrate me so much? Why did his comment, which admittedly looking back, it was snarky in its own right, but why did it bother me to that degree? And I realized that it had hit on some buttons of things that really bothered me when I was like a teenager. Things that people said to me, things that people did and acted and judged me on, where when a friend made that comment that sort of played into those, again, insecurities or
Mm.
uncomfortable feelings that I hadn't thought about in maybe years, it just triggered that almost defense mechanism of, going on the offensive.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what people do. They get offended on the
Hmm.
offensive.
Yes.
And it's something that I think is easy to, I guess, well, I was going to say easy to not spot, but let me turn that around. It's something that can be really hard to spot, because if you feel like you're the one that's under attack, you don't feel like you should be the one to change.
Yeah. That's so true. And I, harken back to a comment that somebody gave to me thinking it was in service of me, yet they did step on a landmine. So I think I've mentioned this a couple of times in our various chats. Somebody told me about 2 years ago that I was not meant for video, right? So her comment was, stick to other medium, like, your writing is so good, stick to that, don't bother being on video. Now, you're right. Like the comment was a little passive aggressive, a little snarky. But if I stripped away all the internal noise about my own insecurities, right, my own thoughts about who I am and what I look like or how I want to look, in and of itself, it's not the best comment, but it's not the worst either, right? Yet, what's interesting is, so this comment came to me 2 years ago, and I actually vowed to never speak to that person. At that time, I was like, I'm done with you, like, F off. Like, yet I know that that comment has changed in my mind because I've changed,
Mm.
right? So not to say I'm 100% there yet in the past year, I've really focused on changing that juice from sourness to at least consumably sour. I don't want to say sweet yet. I'm not there yet, but it's like a little sweet, a little sour, but like, kind of like nice and tangy, I guess.
Mm.
Maybe. A little citrusy, a little tangy. So we're getting there. Yet that, my view of that person and that comment changed because I changed.
Yeah.
So there's something about, right, that sort of what you said, right? It's on us. A lot of
Yeah.
times, like, we hear what we hear because of where we are. And honestly, right, like we process things based on our current mindsets and our state of being and all that narrative, right, that's ever churning in our minds. I'm living proof that, right, something like that comment, I actually have now a before and after because of
Yeah.
this kind of inner work, let's call it that.
And it's interesting because sometimes, like, you can do that work and still realize, and this is not a validation of poor behavior, but sometimes you can realize that that person was still in the wrong. For example, I would genuinely say, even though, yes, you've made the work and you realize it wasn't as bad as you thought,
Yeah.
it's still a pretty shitty comment. It's kind of like a
Yeah.
face for radio kind of comment. Like, it's not a
Yeah.
nice thing to say to someone.
Agreed.
They,
Agreed.
yeah, because they could have said, right now your writing is stronger than your video, but but if you work on the video thing,
Right.
it'll get there, um,
Right.
or something like that. It can be, that opinion can be voiced in so many different ways. And similarly, the comment that I mentioned from my friend, one of the things I realized once I'd sort of, I guess, analyzed and kind of retrospectively looked at the feelings I went through, I realized that this friend actually was triggering that emotion quite a lot. And when I took a step back and wondered why, I realized that it was down to different communication
Mm,
methods,
mm,
where he'll often voice an opinion as if it's not an opinion but a fact. And the way that he communicates them makes them feel like he's voicing them as more important than yours. And in most instances, due to where he is mentally, I guess, they tend to be negative. And that really tends to rub me the wrong way. I see these negative opinions popping up, and they seem like, they're trying to overwrite everyone else's opinions. And what I realized, was, I thought, okay, I'm going to try and work through this in a way where I don't allow it to sort of, drive me into that negative spiral, but rather, I decided to try to basically be pretty passive. If he brings it up, I would just go full Big Lebowski and be like, well, that's just your opinion.
Yeah.
And if he'd, then I noticed that he went into a more negative spiral when people didn't engage in a deeper way, where it was like, yeah, but no, and he starts arguing this, and I'm like, dude, it's not worth the energy. Like, don't
Yeah.
be so mad over like a where Star Trek is going, or whether Rick and Morty did the joke in the way that you want it. Like, just chill. Like, it's
Right. Yeah.
not that important.
Yeah.
But that comment where it's like, dude, it's fine, don't spend your energy on it,
Mm.
just sparks more negativity and defensiveness. And that's where I see, again, that disposition towards taking things in
Yeah.
and filtering them through a negative light.
Well,
And it's tough often for people around us to deal with when we fall into that habit, because it seems to be really easy and contagious. You fall into that spiral really, really easily.
what you said is so powerful, and it for me, right, it reminds me of two very powerful yet simplistic concepts that I've worked really hard to get clear on. One is outcome, right? So in your friend's case, like, what is the outcome that he wanted to achieve, right, by being negative or saying that thing, right? If it's drama, right, if the outcome is drama,
Yeah.
and that's what he needs, he will absolutely double down, right? So it's like the moment that you present a force that's counter to that, or that diffuses that, that triggers, right, that sort of like race to the finish, to be like, oh, like crap, like this guy doesn't get it, like let me stir him up some more.
Yeah.
However, right, so for me, I go, if the outcome is true engagement, right, to drive a mutual understanding, to have a healthy discourse, then naturally, right, if that is the outcome, his behavior would have been different. Choice of words might have still been the same, perhaps, I don't know, right? I don't know him enough, but I would imagine that at some point he would have chosen, which is point number 2 for me in this case, he would have chosen differently, right? The moment that he saw, oh, John Ford didn't want to engage anymore, or I've learned enough for me to have gained some understanding about my friends, philosophy, stance on this matter, etc., then I'm done, right? Okay, like we're good for now, and maybe we come back to another time. So I think for me, right, a lot of times, a lot of people are negative without a clear outcome, or it is a misguided outcome, or right, they know the outcome yet they choose poorly. So to take your point about social media, I mean, you and I are very active. We see shit of all kinds.
Yeah.
Right? And so I want to say that most of the time is very positive, right? People are very engaging, very thoughtful, deliberately intentional about what they want to give out. Yet there are those trolls out there who say things, right? So to me, I think about, or sometimes people say things the wrong way, and and then they become negative. But I think it's because they either lack the clear outcome, right? What do you intend to produce here? Or they have the outcome, yet they chose poorly in how they express that intention vis-a-vis written word. So let's say the outcome is, I want to engage, right? I want to have a discourse, yet if my choice of words and the disposition is completely Debbie the Downer, totally negative, totally manipulative, right? Likely no one would want to engage with that, which then, right, sort of fulfills their own self-prophecy of people suck, which then kind of repeats a spiral. So I think it's about outcome and choice, in conclusion for me.
Yeah, and I think that that touches upon, I guess, kind of comes full circle to the point a little bit earlier where I said it's easy to overlook how big an impact this is having on your life if you feel like you're the one under attack.
Yeah.
Because if you feel like you're the one that's being wronged, and if you think, why are people engaging with my opinions in such poor ways or in such negative ways? And if you don't take the time to step back and think, actually, you know, as what's it called? As Mitchell and Webb said in their sketch, to bring it back to sketch comedy, when they were playing in the Second World War and we're looking at all the Nazi memorabilia and went, "Are we the bad guys?" You know, sometimes we just have to take a step back, look at our own uniform, and wonder, are we the bad guys in that scenario?
Right. Yeah.
But
You
oh, I
brought
was
up a
just
really, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I had a point that I wanted to circle back on from
go,
something you
go
said
for it.
earlier. You talked about, again, the friend saying that negative thing, right? And this might be too simplistic for something as massive as like World War II. Are you the Axis side or not? But to everyday interactions. So back to that sort of level. I thought about just now how, like you said, right, the comments might be snarky, might be terrible, might be just passive aggressive and frankly negative, right? Yet, again, back to choice, right? So I thought about just now, like, I could, like, I had to choose as to how I would live with that comment or my reaction to that comment, right? So taking it back to that comment I received 2 years ago. So person saying that, right, I basically am not fit for video, right? Like that passive aggressive comment, like, oh, you have a face for radio. Okay, you know, that person said it. I don't think they thought of it ever again, right? Yeah, I was the one. I'm still talking about it, so clearly an impact. I'm not gonna lie, it didn't. Yet I could choose, right? And I did choose eventually of how I would move forward from that, or how I would live with it or not live with it. And I think that's where, you know, just to start to kind of help us conclude, I think in a way, how we choose to deal with that negativity and dealing with, in the sense of like, you know, how long we let it live on in us, that's up to us, right? We can't per se choose whether someone's going to be negative, but we can absolutely, and again, not to condone, right, the negative bullshit, not at all. Yet once it's told this way, right, once it hits me, I can decide how long I'm going to simmer in that, you know, BS, how long I'm going to think about that negativity, or how negative I am towards that negativity, or do I redirect the energy and go, okay, wow, this person said something I didn't want to hear, yet yeah, maybe I was lacking in my video skills, and I was, truthfully, right? And you helped me get there. So, right, and it was, you know, it took me a while to ask for help because it was so damaging to me. But that person has no idea. They don't care, right? They moved on with their lives and then some. Yet, right, but then the choice was on me. Yet, I linking it, you know, back to what you said earlier, in that at the end of the day, like, it is really about how we either support that vicious cycle or how we don't, right? We can stop it, like you just said, right? Go Big Lebowski. It's like, okay, like, or we can continue to feed into it and let that negativity bleed on other people. So that's my piece for today.
Yeah, and I think, you know, to nicely tie it into the setup for next week, you know, we can easily go down that rabbit hole and obsess about that negativity for days, weeks, even years. But is there a place where obsession is healthy? Is there a place where obsession is actually helpful and good for us?
Yeah.
That's something we'll discuss next week in O for Obsession.
Looking forward to it, my friend. See you then.
See you then.